All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. We are going to be talking about getting the letters of recommendation for graduate school. I'm going to give a few minutes for people to get in from the waiting room, sign in, get settled, connect to audio, which I still see some people getting connected. And then we have 3 panelists here with us, which they'll be introducing themselves shortly. We have about 8 questions that we're going to go through. The panelists are going to be able to answer those questions. And then there should be some time at the end for you to ask your questions. At any time, feel free to type in something to the chat. I'll be monitoring chat as we go along. So welcome. My name's Deanna Peck, and I am the Director of Peer Connections. I have my EDD actually from San Jose State University, and that is an EDD in higher education or education leadership. Let's see. Dr. Elizabeth Mullen, you're the first person that I see in the pictures, so if you could introduce yourself first, that would be great.
Hello, everyone. I'm Liz Mullen. I'm an associate professor in the School of Management. I have a PhD in social psychology from the University of Illinois Chicago and an undergraduate degree in psychology as well from the University of Memphis. And I've been at San Jose State for about 5 years now. It's nice to meet all of you.
Great, thank you, Liz. And I would say next person is Dr. Amy Leisenring. Could you introduce yourself, please?
Sure, thanks, Dana. Hi, I'm Amy Leisenring. I'm the Associate Dean of Inclusive Student Success for the College of Graduate Studies. I started my position in March of this year. Prior to that, I was both the Director of Access, which is the Advising and Success Center for the College of Social Sciences, and I was also a professor of sociology in the SIS department. I have a PhD in sociology from the University of Colorado at Boulder. I have a master's degree in sociology from New Mexico State University, and I have a bachelor's degree in sociology from Miami University of Ohio, and I've been at San Jose State for 16 years.
Great, thank you. And then the next person is Dr. John Lee.
Hi, welcome everyone. As Deanna was saying, I'm John Lee. I'm a professor in mechanical engineering. I've been at San Jose State since 2002, and I can't count that high on how many years it's added up to be. And I've done, in addition to my regular teaching duties, my research activities, I've done undergraduate advising for mechanical engineering students for several of those years. I've also chaired our graduate studies committee within department. So maybe that offers a little bit of perspective here. And I did my undergrad up the road at Stanford and my graduate work at MIT. So again, I'm glad to see folks, interested, right, especially.
Great, thank you. I know many of you are in the process of thinking about getting those letters and writing them. So let's go and ask our panelists some questions here. The first question that I would have for each of you is, whom should I ask to write my letters of recommendation? Does it matter? Can I just ask any faculty? What about supervisors? Tell us the scoop. Who should we ask? And then why don't we go ahead and start with Dr. Lee?
I think you cut out a little, Dana, with Dr. Who?
Dr. Lee.
Sounded like Mullen. Okay, all right, let me get started. So yeah, great question. And actually, this is probably the #1 thing that I would offer for the whole day, right? So consider that. And in general, my answer would be someone who knows you well and uniquely. And I think, I guess I've got a list of, sort of professional relationships with respect to students, like if it's a unique, open-ended project advisor. So for undergraduates, I've had a few undergraduates with whom I've worked as either through a independent study opportunity, some did lab assistantships, but not so much the title of the position, but sort of the role where there were lots of where there was open-ended, non-standard scenarios, as a writer, as a letter writer, I find it much easier to talk about specific episodes, vignettes that came up where a problem came up and the student was able to address it, or a difficult question that the student thought through methodically. And when I can give specific examples, it's much better than generalities about inquisitiveness, perseverance, which are all good traits. But usually you don't get to those specific episodes of particular problems, like where all the equipment broke down. You still had to be able to take data, and what do you do? Or so these challenging situations where I can give a particular episode, it reveals to the readers of the letter that I really know this individual, right? It's not just saying a lot of generically nice things. So let me offer that and pass it on to other panelists.
Yeah, I'll just say, so in a lot of disciplines, like my discipline in sociology, you don't have an opportunity to actually do research with a professor, and it can make it a lot more challenging to find someone, or three people actually often, that you have those types of working relationships with. So I always, I offer a couple of different pieces of advice. When I used to teach, I would say at the beginning of the semester that it's really important to do whatever you can to establish relationships with the professors that you have, because again, you're not usually given an opportunity to do research with them. So the only way that they're going to be able to say things about you is if they know who you are. And I can't tell you how many times I've had students ask me to write them a letter of recommendation when they never came to my office hours. I never had an individual conversation with them. Really, all I could say was, Johnny got a B in my class. He sat in the second row. So we had no relationship at all. And that's something that you really want to avoid. So the process of getting a letter of recommendation really starts way before the ask. It starts at the point where you need to start thinking about how you're going to build relationships with faculty, go to their office hours, impress them with your work, make them know who you are, because sometimes they're teaching over 100 students in a semester. So I have a lot of other things I could add. I'll let Liz chime in here as well, but that's what I would say at the very beginning, is that you want to make sure that whoever you're asking, you have some type of relationship with. It's not just someone that you took one class with that they don't know who you are.
I would agree with everything that Dr. Leisenring just mentioned. In our discipline as well, I'm always happy to write letters for students who have done research with me, of course. But I also write letters for students who I had in class, but they are students who I know a bit better because they came to my office, or they really impressed me with their project. And so I would just say, if you're in a discipline where maybe you're not doing research with faculty members, is to obviously start going to office hours. Even in searching for a grad school, you may have been asking faculty members for advice on where to go and how to apply, et cetera. So people with whom you've also been discussing graduate school in general might be able to talk about your desire for a grad school and your seriousness about that. And obviously pick someone for whom you performed well in their class. It's difficult for me, but if students get a C in my class, I typically turn them away and suggest they might be able to get a stronger letter from someone else. And so, yeah, if you've done particularly well, that's obviously a better place to start if you don't have those very close one-on-one relationships. But I would argue it's not too late to start developing those, right? To start, even if it's this semester, to start utilizing faculty office hours to get to know folks. And then if you happen to be in a student club and you have a faculty advisor and who is seeing, maybe if you're in a leadership position in a club or something like that. So often for us, it's easy with research, but there may be other ways that you're involved with faculty where they have a little bit more insight into your unique skills and abilities.
And
I'll just
go ahead, Deanna.
I was going to say super quickly, I am not a faculty member, but I see a lot of students through different organizations like Dr. Mullen was mentioning. And I get often asked to write them. I will usually write one if I know the student well, but I always say, make sure you ask the faculty members because they're the ones who have the highest regard and they know you in the academic setting where I might know you just as far as the leadership and persistence there. So that's one thing that I always tell students.
Yeah, and just building on that, I think that it's really important to know the programs that you're applying to and what their requirements are. So a lot of times, at least in the social sciences, if you're applying to a PhD program, they want your 3 letters all to be from faculty. They don't want a letter from your supervisor, or they don't want a letter from your internship director. Whereas when I was the graduate advisor in sociology for our master's program at San Jose State, we would say we wanted 3 letters, 2 had to be from faculty, and 1 could be from a supervisor or someone that you worked with. In social work, for example, they might require that you actually have a letter from someone that you, in an agency where you did an internship. So don't assume that it's okay to include a letter from a supervisor at work unless you know that that's acceptable, because that could really put you at a disadvantage if it's a program that's not, that wants 3 letters from faculty members.
Great, thank you. Can I ask, I'm going on to the next question. Do I ask the same people for all the letters of recommendation? Is it realistic if I'm applying to 10 graduate programs? Can one person write 10 letters?
Shall I go a similar order and mix it up? Okay. So to take that one, the same people, I think, like, Amy had addressed that a bit too with, there's a pool and they can speak to different aspects of how they know you. So if it's about, your commitment, I don't know, even punctuality, perseverance, right? Communication, things like that. It could be a job supervisor depending on the role, whereas other organizations might look for something academic. And so if it's a different blend, it might not be the same people. But the second one, I will say that it's not bad. It's not difficult to write the first letter you write for a student. The fact that writes for a student is difficult. You spend a lot of time thinking about what really to say about that individual unique to them. But the second, third, and fourth ones are much easier. And I would say I do have, when I do get requests, it's almost never for one, unless it's like a particular fellowship or something, then there's only one type. But in general, for like graduate school applications, I'll typically get a minimum of 4 from the same student. Some spread, search out wider, and they might ask for, I think, up to, did someone say 10? I don't know if Deanna said 10, right? But near there, around 8, 9, 10 has happened. Probably more typical, it's kind of that 6 or 7, if I were to kind of just roughly remember, that one student might ask me that I'm applying to, let's say, doctoral programs around the country. Chances are they're going to apply to more than one. And so automatically when a student asks me for a recommendation, for graduate schools, I'm already assuming it's going to be a few. And the later ones are not difficult. You look at the requirements of the institution, anything unique that's different from, but the generic template, the good things you have to say is probably pretty common. How you know the individual, right? Through what interactions do you come to your conclusions about what you want to say? And then that's usually easy to tweak. So I don't see any obstacle to asking for several of the same type, if it's a graduate school application or a fellowship application from the same person.
Dr. Mullen or Leisenring, do you have anything to add to that, or did that pretty much cover it? Yeah, I think that one's pretty good. Let's move on to the next question because I do want to leave time for all of you. When should I ask for these letters of recommendation? And let's start with Dr. Mullen for this one.
I would say as soon as possible, but certainly with, at least for me, it's 2 weeks of lead time. It depends on the point in semester, of course. Sometimes we're busier than others, but 2 weeks is like a reasonable amount of time, if, in my opinion, if you want a faculty member to have time to maybe review a paper you wrote or reflect on the interactions they've had with you, et cetera, and then draft a strong letter. So I have sadly said no to students who needed something like within 3 days. If I had to teach the next 2 days, I just couldn't get to it. So for me, it's at least 2 weeks.
And I know some professors that want 3 weeks to a month. So I would echo that sentiment that the earlier, the better. Or, you can even ask them if you're having a conversation, hey, I'm going to be applying for graduate school. I would love for you to write me a letter. You could ask them how much leeway that they would like, because a lot of professors, it can vary. And there are sometimes I have sometimes in the last minute, if I know a student really well, written a letter that was due in a week. But if I don't know a student really well and they're asking me for a letter for 3 days, then the less likelihood that I'm going to be able to make time in my schedule to do that.
I think that also speaks to getting to know your faculty in your classes. That helps a lot. Dr. Lee, did you want to add to that, or should I go on to the next question?
No, that's right about the right window, kind of that 2, 3, right? And 4 is generous, 2 is about a good minimum.
Sorry, I just wanted to say one other thing, kind of going back to the first question that I think is really important. When you ask someone to write, who should you ask to write you a letter? I think that it's really important that you ask if the person can write you a strong letter, because if almost all professors are willing to write a letter. Not all professors are willing to write a strong letter. And even though it might be hard to hear from one of your professors that they just can't, like Dr. Mullen was saying, if you got a C in her class, she's probably not going to write you a strong letter. And it's very easy for committees who are reviewing letters to kind of get, oh, this is from a professor that really doesn't have a lot to say about the student, versus, wow, this is like a really amazing letter. And maybe even though you got a C, you worked a professor who doesn't feel like they can actually really, sell you as a good candidate for a program. Sorry, I just wanted to add that because I think it's really important.
Actually, no, that is right on target with where we're going, because the next question was, how should I ask for the letters of recommendation? I have via email or in person, but I think even the language, can you write me a strong letter of recommendation? I think that's a great tip. You read into it. Dr. Mullen, Dr. Lee, would you like to add to that at all?
Just very briefly, is that with our remote distance learning, right, and this mode, email is completely fine. I think in previous times, it is nice, after class, right, maybe, if time allows, right, and have that conversation, or not visiting office hours, it's nice to have the connection, because maybe you can talk about, that's an office hours visit is a time that is nice to talk about maybe your long-term aspirations and things like that too. You can express more that's fitting for that could help and understand what to write for the recommendation. But an email approach is fine, I think, just to get the conversation started. It's sufficient.
Is there anything specifically that really, when the person asks, how do they approach that? And this kind of leads into our next question too. Do I need to provide any information to my recommenders?
What I have found that is the most useful, especially if it's either a student who's applying to a lot of programs, or a student that I did know pretty well, but it's been maybe a year or two out, because it is fine to go back to a professor. You know, maybe you graduate school is not on your radar. You're just like, woo, I'm done with school. But like what happened to me, with my bachelor's degree, I waited tables, and then I thought, I think I want to go back to graduate school. And it's okay to go back to your professors, even if you haven't been in touch with them for a year or so. But you should save like papers that you have if you took a class with them and you did really well on it. So if someone comes to me and says, you know, can you write me a letter, it really helps me to be able to remember that student and to be able to reflect on their work. If I can see the paper that they wrote and the comments that I made. So that's one thing that really helps. The other thing that that is really helpful if you're applying to multiple programs is giving the professor a list of the program and the date that the letter is due and the expected format. More and more programs are turning to electronic submission for letters, but there's still a few out there that want handwritten letters, or they want they want a form that's filled out. So that helped me a lot when I was writing a lot of letters for students, to know what form should I be expecting to write the letter, and when is the date, because a lot of times different programs have different dates. So that's something that I would advocate for providing to your
I agree with all of those things. And I would also add, sometimes I ask students, like if they've written a personal statement to accompany their application, to share with me the materials that they will also be submitting. And again, in case it's not a student from this semester, to remind me the context in which we interacted, when that was, et cetera. Because I like to also be able to obviously talk about our own interactions in the past, but also link that to how the student is going to be able to perform in the program. And so telling me why you want to go to that program and what you're interested in studying, et cetera, also helps me write a stronger letter.
Yeah. If I can add two things. And Diana, is this also, because the workshop I know is getting letters of recommendation, it's for more than just graduate school, yes? It's for, does that include job applications and fellowships and things like that?
We're actually talking about graduate school, but if you want to add in for other reasons, go right ahead. It's all relevant.
Okay, yeah, because as a recommendation writer, I lump them similarly, but why I asked that question is that something that could help was if you can provide context to that particular, whatever your target is, right? So if it's a particular graduate school or a program in the graduate school, if you can do some of the legwork to, you know, as on, if it's to a particular discipline, like I might have a mechanical engineer student who wants to go into aerospace engineering. And if you can actually provide for me in the email the one-click link to the homepage of that university's aerospace engineering program, right? Then I can then I'll use the correct names. It'll just help me it removes legwork that I would have to do. I try and be responsible if someone asks me or something. That okay, you're applying to that, right? To that graduate school or that program in that graduate school. Well, what are they about, right? What are they features, their strengths? And that creates a lot of legwork for me. And if I'm busy, I might not get to it. But if you can do that and highlight things, especially if there's a particularly, again, for engineering, if it's a particular technology or a laboratory at that university, right, that drew you toward it, I can take a look. And then the other point, so that's point one is just that, is that if you can help me out with providing direct links to information about that school, not just that university, but that particular graduate program to which you're applying, that would be helpful. The other one, I'm usually pretty direct in saying, if you'd like me to consider writing a letter, I can usually give a short answer that whether I think I can write a well-informed one versus a generic one, and whether the generic one won't carry a lot of weight. But I usually say straight up that make a list of bullet points of what you think are your strengths that I would know about, right, from our interactions, right? And so go list your strengths that we have experienced together, right? Next. If I agree, I'll put into my own words and write about it. If I don't agree, I'll just leave it there and write about other things. So that really helps. That actually overcomes a barrier for me to, all right, get down on the keyboard, right, and start writing, because I have a place to start from.
Those are great tips. I would say they're very helpful for me too, when people are giving me those pointers that they want me to put in the letter. And if I agree, it's much easier for me to make sure it gets in that letter.
Yeah.
All right. What should I do after I've received these letter of recommendations? And anyone can chime in.
So a lot of it depends on how the university wanted the letter. So what's more and more typical is that you, as the applicant, you would supply the information for your recommenders, and then the school sends out an email to the letter writer, and you're then notified when your letter writer actually submits the letter. So one thing that's really helpful is to say you can expect to explain the process. So they want it by this day and it's going to be electronic. If it's electronic, there's not much that you have to do after that, because the school takes care of it. It's actually very nice than the old days where you had to go around and yeah, technology really helps here. But I would certainly, what I've found is really nice also is getting thank you cards. Like if a student gets me says thank you, or just even email, I really appreciate doing this. And then I also really like to know what happened. Like, which school did you get into? Did you get into multiple schools? Because, if we're spending the time doing this, we're rooting for you, that means. So it's really nice to know what actually happens.
Ditto. Summarize well.
Same.
Okay, great. Thank you. Is there anything else before we're taking questions from the students who might have some questions? Is there anything else that I should be aware of or students should be aware of when requesting letters of recommendation? Maybe something we haven't covered yet.
I can chime in with one. There's the timing of just to branch to take off on this timing issue. There's the request made. There's the follow-up after the letter has been submitted, and then there's this worrisome period where the confirmation that it has been submitted, and many electronic forms, both the student and the applicant and the recommender will get some sort of confirmation back. That's not always true. I think still currently, I think only about 2/3, maybe 3/4 of the institutions actually give me a confirmation letter that yes, your recommendation for so-and-so was received. The other times it just goes, and then it goes in and I actually don't even get a confirmation. So I'm actually wondering, so I'll let the student know I submitted it on this date, right? Let me know, hopefully it went through. On this thing of timing, I think I appreciate, and I'll usually let the students know too, who make requests, that I appreciate I don't mind at all the deadline is getting close reminder, because again, in order to juggle this thing and fit it in among many on a long to-do list, some things that maybe will be scheduled like on some weekend 10 days out, right, is when I'll have time for this. It's possible that 30 things jump in line, and it's possible, even though individual keep to-do list, it's probably to the requester's best interest that at some sort of courtesy window, and maybe you can talk about this, when making the request, is there a time, I should confirm, delay. And usually what I tell individuals is that if I have not confirmed with you 48 hours before the real deadline, but please bug me, right? And in turn, what I'll try and do is, that's usually my window. So I'll say, let me know at least 2 weeks in advance, right? Ordinarily, I get them in 2 days ahead, right? Or more, right? With a cushion just in case. If you haven't heard confirmation from me, right, 48 hours before deadline, bug me, right? Because the worst thing I would want to do is, forget, right, after saying I would.
And I would just add to try to be as organized as possible. Sometimes during the application process, you decide, oh, I want to add another school or two that I would like to apply to. So like if it's more than one letter, like if it's to more than one place, having a spreadsheet of like that Dr. Leisenring mentioned, like, is it going to be online or on paper? When's the deadline, et cetera? That just helps us not have to track 15, like if you're not forwarding 15 different emails, so I want to also apply to this one. And same thing on the follow-up when you provide the faculty member with whatever information you think will help them write you a stronger letter, to just compile that all in one place as well. If you're sharing your application statement, if you're sharing, you know, the reminder of how we know each other, et cetera. So I just find like the better the student is at that, the easier it makes my job. And then I'm much, yeah, I mean, it's easier to write a stronger letter and to hit all those deadlines when I don't have to search through my email for 15 different emails to find the deadlines.
And the last thing that I would add is that sometimes I would get questions from students about whether it matters if the recommender is a full-time faculty member with a PhD or a lecturer who might just have a master's degree. Unfortunately, there is a hierarchy in education. And sometimes the more prestigious program that you apply to, or a lot of times PhD programs, they would prefer that your letters are from full-time professors who are on the tenure track. And I know that's a whole different conversation because sometimes students don't, we make this distinction between full-time and part-time. That's not how long or how much someone actually works. It's just whether they're on the tenure track, that those are full-time professors or people who have been tenured, versus part-time. To some universities that does matter. One of the challenges though that we face at San Jose State is that there's a lot of part-time or lecturers that are teaching your classes, and a lot of them are amazing, you know, instructors or professors. So you might not even have a chance in your program to get to know very many tenure track or full-time professors because sometimes they don't teach as much. But if you are applying to really prestigious programs, that can matter. So that's just something to keep in mind. I would say though, if you had a choice between a lecturer professor or a part-time professor who you have a really good relationship with, who knows your work, versus a full-time professor with a PhD that you only took one class with and you didn't really have too much contact with, I would go with the lecturer to write the letter. But that is something that sometimes students ask about, and sometimes you will read about that it's important to get letters from, you know, people with as much prestige as possible, because like I said, again, unfortunately there is hierarchy in higher education sometimes.
Great. I think that goes right back to your point of really getting to know your faculty when you're in their classes, each and every one, and getting to know them well. So thank you. Any other words of wisdom from the three panelists before I turn it over to the students to ask their questions? All right, I'm not hearing anything. So students, it's your turn. You can either raise your hand and unmute yourself and ask the questions, or you can type in the chat and we will ask questions from there.
Wow, we gave all the information that was needed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just to brainstorm, you know, to fill the airways, but with hopefully constructive ideas. Is that it's good to and talk to not only this audience but with peers, and you can talk to even to one of your recommenders about ideas for other recommenders. And I think sometimes some of the students I've known awkwardly, there's been a few students who graduated from our program and who never had class with me, but I know them pretty well, and that was through my academic advising role, where maybe 4 semesters straight. Each semester they came talk to me, not just about next semester's class selections, right, but where they wanted to head with their program, how things are going. And it's a chance to talk about what they see in their future. And so there are maybe some other roles, or maybe there was the lead coordinator for some project showcase or something like that. And they weren't your section project instructor, but maybe your project shined at that event. So maybe to widen the pie. I think finding 3 is pretty hard. I think to find 3 distinct ones and to take off a little bit of pressure. Maybe that's the good thing about having all 3, is that not all 3 have to have the same level of content. It can be a blend of perspectives. Maybe the one from a lecturer who knows you well, and maybe one from a full-time professor who doesn't know you as well. And then as the aggregate goes, now you have this nice picture, right, from different viewpoints.
Thank you. We had one question come in. Can I get the professor a gift if they write a letter for me?
You certainly don't need to, but you can. I don't reject gifts. I would never want a student to go out of their way financially or anything. Again, I think a nice thank you letter or card is fine, but I have had, usually I think it's most common for students to get a gift if they actually get into the program, and that as a thank you gesture. But you can, but it's definitely not something that you should feel compelled or that professors expect.
Great. We have a question. What if we had,
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I'd go further. I'd actually discourage it certainly during the process, right? I think the very after all is said and done, right? Then that's a different story. But I think while you're in the application process, I would just err on this side of, right, keeping things separate at least, right? I'd actually discourage gifts. It doesn't come up too often. I think like a thank you note, right? Just telling about the situation is very much appreciated, right? So.
I think that's a great point. Timing as to when that would come makes a difference if it does, yes. So another question, what if we had a professor for a lab but not a lecture? Would that person be a good person to ask for a letter of recommendation?
As long as you had meaningful interactions with that person, I think so.
Yeah. In engineering, I'd say more so, right? Because the different contexts you can, because I think the one thing, at least in the engineering discipline, it's tackling an open-ended problem where there was no right answer, right? I think that's highly appreciated, and sometimes those things come up in lab situations more often than many lectures. And to go stretch a little bit of a stretch generalization, but in many ways your transcript covers lecture in some classes. I don't want to undersell some lectures, but certainly in the more, especially if it's constructive criticism or I think debate-filled dialogue in lecture is actually pretty interesting. I think the strongest thing, one of the better statements, if I can recall an episode where a student corrected me, right, in a professional way, I think that speaks a lot to the student, right? And sometimes that might happen in a lecture, right? But a lot of times, when we oversimplify and generalize lectures being a one-way delivery from the instructor teaching the student, there's fewer opportunity. But those episodes where there's no right answer, right? I think that's where a student can really shine.
Great, thank you. We have a question here. If my professor doesn't have time to write a letter for me and suggest that I draft something, they could make edits and sign it. Is that okay? Or should I ask somebody who has a little bit more time?
I have heard of such things. I would never ask a student to do that. It puts the student in a very uncomfortable position. I would not want to have had to do that myself because for so many different reasons. So I would say that personally, I would recommend asking someone else. But if you really think that this is a person that, you know, you have a good relationship with, you could just say, you know, I'm a little bit uncomfortable with that. Could you at least just give me like a couple of bullet points? And then you could try to craft something together. But I personally would not want to go into the head of one of my professors and think of how they think about me. And it would just feel, I mean, you want it to be a strong letter, and a lot of us have tendencies not to sell ourselves the way that we should. So I think that's a tricky one. Again, my advice would be, see if you can find someone else. If you can't, see if they can at least give you a little bit of a basis to go on. I don't know what the other panelists would.
I don't ask students to do that either. I would, like in response to a specific question, Sierra, I would think about the rest of the context of the reply. This may be a professor who asks every single person to do that. It may not be because they're particularly busy. I mean, all professors are busy, but I just mean like that might just be the standard way in which they write letters. So I think if that, I'm going to disagree with Dr. Leisenring just a bit. Like if that was the request, negotiating that from the faculty member and negotiating that with the faculty member probably isn't going to lead to a better outcome. So you just decide whether you want to do it or whether you want to ask someone else.
I will say that I've
Dr.
actually
Lee,
asked.
do you have?
Oh, Dr. Mullen, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Nope, I was done.
I have actually asked a student to do that before, and typically it's a student that I know very well, so I know how they would take this response or not. And sometimes it's because the student is asking me and saying, can you get it done within a week? And I look at my schedule and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't this week. I'm more than happy. I want to help and support you in whatever way I can, but I just cannot take an hour and put together something that I feel is going to be a strong letter. So if you want, you know, think of something, think of all the points, like the bullet points that you all talked about earlier, saying what are some things that you'd like me to say type of thing and point out. And that makes it so much easier for me to draft it. Again, typically it's when I am just feeling so swamped and overwhelmed and it's a short period of time that they're asking me to put it together. So I have done it. So yeah, I guess that one's all over the board. I'm going to point out in the chat, I put a link for an evaluation. So if you're still with us and listening, if you could please click on that link before you leave so that you can fill it out. I think it's only like 3 or 4 questions to give us some feedback. But we still have plenty of time. We have, 10, 15 minutes. If you have questions, please keep them coming into the chat or feel free to unmute yourself and say hi and ask the question out loud. Great question. So I had a professor who is retired. Is it appropriate to ask him or her for the letter?
So want to take that? I think there's really no harm, and and it's up to that individual, of course. But I don't know. I'm not there yet on this side of retirement. I'm going to pretend that they have more time than I do. Right? So it actually may work out really well. Right? Who knows, right? No, I think it's pretty harmless to ask. I think from the perspective of the readers of the letter, I think it's great. I don't think they won't, as long as the individual knows you. And I don't think they even care to ask if that individual is retired or not, as long as they know you, right? So I think the value from the reader side, who is going to be reading those letters, I think it's great. So there's no reason to hesitate, I can think of.
That does remind me of one, and I agree. I totally agree with Dr. Lee. The worst that they can say is no. And I know a lot of retired professors that would be happy to do that, especially if it was a student that they had a good relationship with. One thing that sometimes I have had students do is when they graduate, they'll just ask me to write a generic letter that can be used if they're going to go to graduate school at some point. And I always, I never do that, because the downside of that is that then I can't tailor it for the specific graduate programs that the student would be applying to. So, and I know that students do that because they're afraid that I'm going to go somewhere, and hopefully if I did, you would be able to track me down if you wanted me to write you a letter. But you really want the best letters are one that are tailored to that program. So like Dr. Lee was saying, you know, he even providing a link to information about the program is helpful. Me being able to not just say to whom it may concern when I'm addressing whoever's in charge of the application process, but I can at least say, you know, dear Dr. So-and-so, if I know who the chair of the search committee is, and then even being able to put the name of the program and the university. Some professors don't do that because it does take a little bit more time. Whenever I do letters, I always change the name of the university to make sure that it seems really personalized. So if I wrote a student a letter right when they graduate, all of that would be missing. So I always tell students, you know, I'm not going anywhere. You can find me, keep your papers, and wait until you know where you're going, and then reach out and ask me, because otherwise it's just not going to be as specific and personalized, which can sometimes really matter a lot.
Yeah, I think I'd add on to that. When students leave and there's an extended period of time between when they spoke with you and when they're going on to graduate school, it's kind of nice that they would connect with you periodically, once a year or every 6 months or something like that. Just a quick email to say, hey, I'm still out there. I loved your class. Those interactions that we had were wonderful. Just to keep that connection and that relationship going. If there's going to be a break between when you had that faculty member and when you're going on to graduate school, but that connection is important to keep. We're starting to get people to say thank you, which is wonderful. I would echo that. Thank you to our 3 wonderful panelists. I really appreciate all the time and effort that you put in here. We will stick around for maybe 5 more minutes if you have questions. Go ahead, Amy.
So I'll be right back.
Oh. All right. So again, if you have questions, feel free. I'll put that link in one more time just in case you got it lost in the chat. And then we're almost done. Getting some love. Always appreciate those reactions on Zoom, especially when we can't see the pictures.
Yeah, good luck to everyone. Yeah, it's a new adventure.
Yeah, we've all talked about how we're busy, but we're always happy to support students. So, so reach out and ask.
Yeah, I can't remember who said it, but we are your cheering section, right? And really do, you know, we are happy, you know, when you do find success.
And this is being recorded, so once we get it edited, we will be putting it on the Peer Connections YouTube page, so you can look back if you want to hear that, or if you want to reach out to any of us, look up our emails. Most of them are the typical emails at San Jose State, so